This is Michael Popok, Legal AF After Dark. Wheels of justice move slow. Legal news, on the other hand, moves at a rapid pace. And we caught the story of Rudy Giuliani losing $148 million jury verdict in the defamation case brought by Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman this past Saturday. And during it, my partner and I, Ben Meiselas, we said, well, isn't he defaming them all over again on the courthouse steps and in news conferences during the trial? I mean, you got to be a special brand of stupid to defame the people that are suing you for defamation during the defamation trial. And we cover it all and broke it down on Legal AF this past weekend. Take a listen.
Rudy Giuliani gets hit with this verdict. Does that get deferred? Does he get to appeal it? What happens with if he declares bankruptcy? Will Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss actually see any money? Let's discuss this all right now. So the lengthy verdict form that you all saw, for those watching on our YouTube channel, we'll post it up there. Again, here's how the damages broke out in the verdict form by the jury. Compensatory damages for Ruby Freeman, $16,171,000. For Shay Moss, $16,998,000. Then it went to the issue of emotional distress or general damages for the intentional infliction of emotional distress claim, a separate claim. $20 million for Ruby Freeman, $20 million for Shay Moss. And then you went to punitive damages, $75 million. There was an 8-person jury in the civil trial. It had to be a unanimous decision, and it was. We're talking about a total of $148 million in a verdict entered against Rudy Giuliani. It was about a week-long trial. It was just on the issue of damages, the same way that the case against Trump next month will just be on the issue of damages and punitive damages, because Rudy Giuliani failed to participate in basic aspects of the case. The same way as this trial started, Rudy Giuliani said, I'm going to testify. I'm going to set the record straight. He gave these press conferences after each day of the trial where he said, I intend to testify. I'm going to let you know what really happened. I'm going to confront Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. He also continued to defame them after the trial. After the days of trial, that is, when he would go out and do these press conferences, and then they would then show the jury, look what Rudy Giuliani just said about them again. Outside, after these proceedings ended, here's what Rudy Giuliani was doing. And that gave you just a glimpse into the behavior of Rudy Giuliani and MAGA people in general during these court cases. They don't turn over the documents, so they get sanctioned. They don't provide answers to the most basic questions of litigations. They don't show up when they're requested to show up. And so ultimately, the judge basically said, enough's enough. You know, we're finding you liable, enough of the games. And now the case moves on to the damages portion of it. Giuliani, as I mentioned, did not show up there. Michael Popok, take us through what went down, maybe your impressions during the trial, how ultimately Giuliani's lawyer essentially had to argue during the closing argument that my client is a bad guy, but don't judge him based on what he did in recent times. Just realize he's an old guy. This was actually the closing argument. Remember the good old days with Rudy? Well, that didn't work. I thought the lawyer for Rudy also insulted the jury's intelligence by attacking plaintiffs' expert witnesses. And then you had Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss confidently confronting Giuliani, testifying, going through our judicial process that exists. They were cross-examined. They put themselves before the jury. Their lawyer pointed that out as well on closing argument. They showed up. They told you what went down in their life. The other person didn't and was defaming them outside of the courthouse too. So it gives us a broader glimpse too, right, into like people who participate in our judicial system and people who try to shred it and rip it down.
The number one reason that Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman rightfully won their case is because of Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. They were horribly defamed and doxxed. Their lives were turned upside down and inside out, and nobody was able to communicate that better than Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. There wasn't a dry eye in the house when they testified. That jury sat riveted during that testimony. I got choked up preparing to do a hot take about the testimony. I mean, it's that powerful. And juries, there's a lot of criticism about the jury system in America, but I believe in it. And at the end of the day, juries don't like frauds. They don't like somebody who's not authentic, and they don't like to be lied to. And all of those things happened on the other side of that table with Rudy Giuliani. He was not authentic. He decided he'd rather, as the judge pointed out during a hearing without the jury, he'd rather go out and try to pander to his social media audience outside the courtroom than do anything effective to defend himself inside the wood paneling of the courtroom. And that's the split screen we've always seen with MAGA. And Donald Trump is it's the playbook that they all run. Rudy Giuliani ain't no Donald Trump, and he does a very ham-fisted impression of Donald Trump. He figured, well, if Donald Trump could hold press conferences and not testify, I'll do the same thing. Except, there are very skilled lawyers on the other side, as there are in the civil fraud case in New York. And those lawyers were smart enough every time Rudy Giuliani said something outside the courtroom during the trial, including the first 2 days, that was inconsistent with the judge's orders about what he could and could not say, and or were just more defamatory statements. They brought it to the judge's attention, and more importantly, they presented it to the jury. You're not going to hear from Mr. Giuliani apparently in the courtroom, but here's what happened outside the courtroom. Roll tape. And they just rolled it. And the jury couldn't help. I'm sure there was a lot of eye rolling, couldn't help but watch the real-time self-destruction of Rudy Giuliani. If they had any doubts at all on that jury, it was all doubt was removed because of Rudy Giuliani's own conduct. Even his own lawyer, Joe Sibley, who was the last in a long line of lawyers. This one, this is the one that got the short straw and actually had to try the case. He was the best, and I am a defense lawyer. The best that he could do was to tell the jury, I know you hate my client. He's old. He's 80. He's losing his fastball. He does weird things. But, remember him when he was mayor in the 80s. First of all, that's not the standard for assessing punitive damages. Punitive damages are for what you've done right now as a punishment, not what whatever you think your laurels or your resume is that's now in shreds 40 years ago. So if that is the best you can do, and then your guy compounds it with his eye rolling in the courtroom, his refusal to look at the jury, his refusal to look Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman in the eye, the jury is going to do the right thing, and they're going to follow the evidence. And we, just to remind those that are joining us for the first time, and of course remind people that have been with us for the whole journey about our analysis. As you mentioned, Ben, the judge, as a sanction and as a finding, found as a matter of law that Rudy Giuliani had defamed those two women, the mother-daughter team, and that they had suffered damage, and that left it only to the jury to decide how big of a check they were going to write. You and I thought it was going to probably approach, if they were asking 50 million, you and I were joking 60, 80, 90, somewhere. I thought south of 100 million. But we'll talk about the jury verdict in a minute. But the judge also went a step further because of all of Rudy's misconduct. He has no one to blame but himself. And the misconduct of him hiding his financial records from the other side, which is important to a punitive damage case, refusing to say how much he made on his podcast, how much he made in collection from his audience / suckers, how much he's made, what's in his 401k, what's in his pension plan from the federal government, and all. He just refused to turn it over. And the judge says, all right, fine. If you don't turn it over by next week, which he didn't, I'm going to instruct the jury that the reason that you did not reveal your finances is because you're trying to mislead them to have sympathy to lower the number when they get around to awarding punitive damages. And I'm going to so instruct them. And they did. So before the jury even went back to deliberate, they were basically told that Rudy Giuliani's a liar and a fraud, and he's trying to mislead you. That's not a great place as a defense lawyer to be, to send the jury off for their first session of deliberation. It took him 10 hours. We on Legal AF were speculating, what is taking so long? And I thought, and I was wrong, I thought that what was taking so long is that there was a group on one end of the extreme. They wanted to give like 10 million. And there was another group that wanted to go to like a couple of 100 million, and they couldn't find the compromise position. But when I got the jury verdict form, which took about 10 hours for them to render it, it had some weird numbers, which we'll have to wait to jury interviews to figure out what they did. But they used the formula. I don't know what the formula was. I don't know what it was based on. But when you have $16,171,000, so specific, $16,998,000, and one more than the other. They use the formula in their own. The juries do that. They're like, well, for every, maybe they heard a number about social media hits. Maybe they heard about, the 5 million of whatever's happened to them by the attacks, and they multiplied that by some number they were given by the Economist, and they came up with a number. But they came up with a number, and then very smartly, guided by the lawyers, they set a punitive damage number. I think they reverse engineered this, but it's not so many multiples of actual compensatory damages that for that reason it could be reversed or vacated on appeal. They basically doubled the compensatory damages of 37 and change, came up with 75 million, which is about right under the case law, whether you say it's 1 times compensatory damages or 2 times under the case law. There's some formula that you have to kind of stick to. You can't do 10 times compensatory, but they got it about right. Now, Rudy, of course, first thing he got off in saying, I love the press conferences for Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss. They were so powerful, so eloquent, so authentic about what happened to them. Lady Ruby on one side, daughter on the other. I mean, just amazing stuff. And then you have to contrast that with Rudy Giuliani's ridiculous, I have evidence, there's discovery, I should have testified, I didn't testify, the judge is against me. All ridiculous. These are not grounds for appeal. If he needed to testify, then he needed to testify. If he got stopped on certain things he wanted to say, he needed to make a record in order to preserve issues for appeal. And so now we've got this 148 million, and I'll leave it to you next about, and I did a hot take on it. What happens next? How do you collect 148 million? What happens with bankruptcy? What happens with appeals? And so I don't know if you want to kind of shape that a little bit.
So the next step is if Rudy Giuliani wants to stay or pause collection efforts that Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss would initiate right away, would have to do exactly what Trump did in the federal court in New York when Trump was found liable for defamation and sexual abuse in the E. Jean Carroll case in May. You got to post a supersedious bond that is at least equal to what the judgment is. So Trump posted a $5 million bond pending his appeal of E. Jean Carroll's verdict against him in the other E. Jean Carroll defamation and sexual abuse case. So Rudy Giuliani would have to do that here. Now, can Rudy Giuliani come up with the funds of $148 million? Absolutely not. Can he come up with anything near that? Absolutely not. But do I think Rudy Giuliani is hiding money and hiding assets? Yes. And so I think now the work begins by Freeman and Moss to start collecting and trying to find all of his assets. And there are other proceedings and debtor exams and all these other procedures to try to identify where his assets are, to seize those assets, to take his wages, any money that he makes. By the way, including, probably doing some procedures regarding Trump and Donald Trump's political action committees, that if they think they're going to try to pay Rudy Giuliani money, all that money goes immediately to Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss. They'll look at his podcast money. They'll look at all of that and they'll start collecting. Now,
and one more before you move on to that we haven't talked about. I've been involved with these pension forfeiture proceedings. He gets a pension, I'm sure, as being a former, it's hard to believe he was the U.S. attorney. He was the former U.S. attorney, Department of Justice in New York. He's got a pension, and they can go and he can actually lose that pension and have it forfeited and paid over to Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss.
Now, if Rudy Giuliani tries to declare bankruptcy, then that goes through a bankruptcy proceeding. Because this is an intentional act, an intentional tort, it's done with malice. It is what's referred to as a non-dischargeable debt. And of course, Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss, they'll have to assert that if Giuliani files for bankruptcy. Giuliani will try to claim this judgment and all of his other debts are dischargeable. In bankruptcy, what's called an adversary proceeding would take place, but an adversary proceeding where there's already a judgment in a sister court like there is right here in the Washington, D.C. District Court, what Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss's lawyers would do is tell the bankruptcy judge, hey, look, for purposes of the adversary proceeding, this jury's already found punitive damages. In other words, that Giuliani's acted intentionally and with malice and fraud, and therefore it's non-dischargeable. So Rudy won't be able to extinguish this in bankruptcy. And so Rudy's got big problems. I mean, for the rest of the remainder of Rudy's life, Freeman and Shea Moss will seek to collect on him, and then they're going to look to the estate. And so any of Rudy Giuliani's kids who are hoping for a trust fund or anything like that, or any money in a will, Ruby Freeman and Shea Moss are going to be right there, ready to seize it. Popok, final thoughts on Freeman and Moss, because then I want to talk about how this relates to the Donald Trump defamation case, which is set for trial next month, end of January. And it's also a case where Trump's been found liable already by a jury in the previous case. And a doctrine called collateral estoppel now means that that jury verdict is such that Trump is found liable in the next defamation case against Trump. So it's just damages and punitive damages. And like Giuliani, Donald Trump's out there repeatedly defaming E. Jean Carroll. And this next jury in New York is going to say, after Donald Trump was found liable by a prior jury, he went on CNN the next moment in a town hall in front of millions and humiliated her, and has done it again each and every time. That Trump verdict is going to be massive, Popok. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a bit. Final words on Freeman and Moss.
Yeah, and I'll tie it back to Trump also. The Ruby Freeman at her press conference said she's not done. There are other people that are continuing to defame her. This does not conclude the chapter. And I said it a hot take. There will one day be a bronze statue of Ruby Freeman and Shea Moss as a testament to their heroism and their courage of what they're doing. They are at the heart of the Georgia election interference case, Ruby Freeman especially. She's a prime witness there. At least 3 of the co-conspirator defendants with Donald Trump are tied back to what they did to Ruby Freeman to try to get her fraudulently to admit that she participated in voter fraud when she didn't. And there are people even there, the co-conspirators like Travion Cutie and Mr. Willie Floyd, who continue to this moment to defame Ruby Freeman and Shea Moss on social media, giving rise to future cases against them. And now they've got a potential $148 million war chest to go after people. In addition, they settled before the Giuliani case with a number of right-wing media companies. And so they had that pot already prepared. So Georgia has a 1-year statute of limitations for defamation. Within 1 year of somebody defaming you, you got to file your lawsuit. So if I'm not sure. I asked on my hot take for people to go scrub the internet and see if Donald Trump said anything stupid and defamatory against those 2 in the last year, because that would give rise to a new claim. You can't go back beyond a year. But these 2 up in Georgia certainly could be sued for defamation. And Rudy Giuliani just 3 days ago defamed them again the way that Donald Trump did. Now, on to Donald Trump for just 2 seconds. That original, you and I had a head scratcher about why, with all the evidence that was presented in the early summer trial of E. Jean Carroll, the former editor who a judge had been raped by Donald Trump, sexually assaulted, and defamed in the sexual misconduct was in 1996, and then defamation ever since. And yet only awarded her, after hearing evidence, even including expert testimony of some economists, of about, $2.5 million or so of punitive damages. We thought that was pretty light, and we weren't quite sure. Now, forget that. The new jury isn't going to know about that. It's not relevant to their issue of just how big of a set of damages, punitive included, they're going to hit Donald Trump with for defaming her again, over and over again, to send the message. And it's not going to be in the courtroom officially, but everybody knows this is so close in time to the $148 million judgment that the jury is going to know about it. And certainly the lawyers, and we know them well, they've been on our show, Robbie Kaplan, is going to ask for a bigger number now, knowing that a jury is willing to pick up a pen and write a big check if presented with the appropriate evidence against a defendant that they despise who has done these things. And so I think now, and we'll and then either at commercial after commercial or whatever, we'll talk about the fact that this trial against Rudy Giuliani against Donald Trump is going forward in the middle of January. He does not have sovereign immunity, and we'll after our break we'll tell the audience why the case is going forward. He has no immunity.
Yeah, he doesn't have absolute presidential immunity. By the way, I bet you that Trump's lawyer in the E. Jean Carroll case, Joe Tacopina, either wrote a note to Donald Trump or told Boris Epstein or someone who hangs out with Trump all the time, you see what a good job I did for Donald Trump, that the jury only hit Trump
Right.
for $5 million. Look at what, I bet you Tacopina did that. Look at what the jury did. And then he's going to say, because Donald Trump's been throwing Tacopina under the bus lately,
Right.
and blaming Tacopina for the $5 million. Now, because of Trump's conduct post Tacopina's defense, look, I want to be objective here. Compared to Giuliani's team, Tacopina had I think, a more difficult case, and the jury only awarded $5 million. But this is the thing about representing Trump. What did Trump do the next day after Trump was only hit with a $5 million verdict? He went on and defamed E. Jean Carroll again. It makes it impossible to represent him. One final point I want to make as well, though, too, about the case that Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss can now file, to the extent there is a claim within the statute of limitations against Donald Trump. They didn't sue Trump originally for defamation because they didn't want the case to be stayed or bogged down on the question of absolute presidential immunity, as that was stopping and staying all of these cases, right? So on about 2 weeks ago, when the Blasingame decision came down, that found that Donald Trump was not entitled to absolute presidential immunity on things relating to the January 6th insurrection, because his conduct there fell outside even the outer perimeters of Article 2 executive authority, because it involved election and campaigning. So to me, the Blasingame decision is dispositive when it comes to Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss, that Trump's statements about them do not fall within the outer perimeters of his absolute presidential immunity, because it involved election and campaigning per Blasingame. So now they're able to sue Donald Trump on that basis. The statute may have run, but I think their broader point that they wanted to have is they wanted that case before a jury. They wanted their justice, and they probably realize that no matter what, Trump is going to defame them again, because he's sociopathic and a malignant narcissist, and he will continue. It's just a matter of when's the next time he's going to do that. He will defame them. It's just a matter of when. He can't help himself.
And now seeing Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss, we've heard so much about them, but now seeing them and seeing how much they were psychologically and emotionally devastated by it, I am sure in consultation with their lawyers, they made a decision not to go after Donald Trump because they were afraid. Karen Freeman Agnifilo, our colleague and podcast partner, made that point a couple of weeks ago. And I think she's right. The more I see them, I think she's right. Because what you and I would have done if this was just a straight like business dispute and we didn't have crazy, violent party on the other side, Donald Trump, we would have at least filed the case inside of the statute of limitations to preserve the claim, let it be stayed, and then move forward with Rudy Giuliani. They didn't even do that. They were willing to walk from Donald Trump. So I don't think they could put their clients through this. One last just observation. One of the reasons that the punitive damages got ratcheted up, just fire hosed in Rudy's case is because of what I said earlier, which is they were given an instruction by the judge that you are to assume that Rudy Giuliani is hiding his assets from you when you write your check. That's not yet present in the Trump case. It may still be about that. I'm not sure if he's turned over all of his financials. I think his finances are a little bit more public since the civil fraud case has revealed all of them in terms of statements of financial condition and where assets are. And there's a monitor over everything that he owns. So I'm not sure it's going to have that same. I'm not sure that when Robbie Kaplan makes her opening statement, she's going to have a jury as pissed off on the issue of the finances as they were against Giuliani. But that doesn't mean that you're not right, that Donald Trump is even more despicable than than Rudy Giuliani, especially in New York. And that all things, setting that all aside, there's no doubt in my mind the number this new jury is going to award is going to be many times multiple higher than the jury in May awarded her, because of the despicable nature of the new conduct and because of, they're going to send a message through the punitive damages. So I don't know if it's $100 million, because they got to, you always have to tie it to that compensatory. So if the compensatory damages that if Robbie and her team are able to put on substantial, and this is a little bit of a problem, I just want to make it clear for our audience. It's new, she got an award for she was compensated for all of the damage from another jury for everything from 1996 all the way up until that jury award. Now it's got to be like new damage, actual compensatory damage, and they're going to have to put out a good expert on that in that delta, and then a punitive damage number that sort of ties to that. So the only limiter here is how big of an actual damage award they're going to be able to come up with in order to then have several multiples for punitive damages, and total this thing out at some really high number. But look, we'll follow it every day, every way, and every filing to bring it to our people's attention. But the market, I believe, has been reset, and they'll give the highest dollar amount that they think they can. And Robbie will ask for the highest dollar amount that she thinks she can get away with and have supported on appeal.
Let's be clear, when we're talking about compensatory and the overall kind of damages other than punitive damages, we're talking about, number one, like economic damages, doctor's bills and salary and things. But we're also separately, we're talking about general damages, which is emotional distress. And think about this closing argument or opening statement. Donald Trump was found to have engaged in sexual abuse of my client,
Rape.
E. Jean Carroll. He was found to have engaged in what is the same thing as rape, although there's a technical definition variance in New York. But this court has found that to be the same thing as a rape that took place. Number one. Number two, Donald Trump was then found to have defamed E. Jean Carroll in connection with raping her. Number three, immediately after a jury vindicated my client's rights, which was the most important day in her life after all of the trauma that she had, he went on CNN and then humiliated her and did it again to his rape victim, to his rape in front of millions of people. There is no bigger trauma than anybody. This is going to be the argument.
Right.
There is no bigger trauma than that. We initially thought when we put this complaint, $10 million. That's not enough for this emotional trauma. $40 million. And then we think that you should award punitive damages 5 times that and hit him with $150 million.
Yeah.
I think that you will see an argument that looks just like that. And then here's what we'll say. Here's what I'll say. And as we get really into the weeds on this, then you're going to have Judge Engoron's judgment in the New York Attorney General civil fraud case. That's going to hit sometime right around when the jury verdict hits. It could happen while the jury's deliberating. So what you're going to have right around early February to mid-February, mark the words, rewind the tape, Donald Trump's going to have about $500 to $1 billion in judgments against him.
I wrote $750 million.
Yeah, I exactly. I think it'll be. I'm hedging a little bit right now. $500 at $1 billion in judgment, and he's going to have to post a bond.
If you like lawyers who know what they're talking about when it comes to law and politics and justice, you came to the right place. Legal AF. If you know everything about Legal AF and you're part of our audience and movement, we appreciate you. If you have no idea who I am or what I'm talking about, that was Legal AF. I'm Michael Popok, and catch us on MeidasTouch YouTube every Wednesday and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then on podcast platforms of your choice. So until my next hot take, till my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.